I was asked to essentially speak on the registration of data controllers, and particularly having regard to questions and concerns that individuals, including attorneys, may have about that process. So I will have a very focused delivery. It's not a presentation in terms of a PowerPoint per se, but just to share information with you as to where we are, what you can expect, how we propose to go forward, and to answer what we know are some of the burning questions. I do have a list which I'll try to go through as quickly as possible in order to get out as much information as I can in the time that we have. Now, let me first start by saying I am aware of some level of, I would almost say, panic by persons as to data protection compliance and not feeling like they are ready, whether for overall compliance or for registration. In one word, I would say relax. What we don't want is panic and chaos. We as an office, even as the regulator, recognize that notwithstanding that we've had a 2-year transitional period, the fact is that data protection is something that it's a practice, it is a behavior, it is a culture that has to be developed. And so we are not expecting that persons would have changed overnight. Compliance is also not a deadline or not a target that can be reached. Compliance is an objective that you aim for, and I would almost call it a moving target, in the sense that what you are required to do to comply may change over time just by virtue of the fact that use of information changes over time. How you process information changes over time. There are technological advancements that change how we do things over time. And so what is required to protect personal data will itself change over time. So when in aiming to comply, you're always looking at how you can have newer, better, improved processes to protect personal data. So it's really about focusing on the rights of the data subject, ensuring that you don't violate those rights, and insofar as you're dealing with their personal data, taking as many and as best steps as you can to protect it. Now, that being said, where are we with respect to the regulatory regime and this requirement for registration? Now, December 1, 2023, we brought in certain additional sections of the Act. That included the requirement for data controllers to register. So strictly speaking, as of December 1, 2023, there was a legal requirement for all data controllers to register. There is provision in the Act for certain controllers or processes to be accepted. That has not yet been done. And so just based on the strict requirement, it is all data controllers that would be required to register. However, we also know that on December 1, 2023, a 6-month extension was announced. And that was an extension of time to allow persons to take steps to comply with the Act. That is the extension that ends tomorrow, May 31st. Consequent on that ending of the extension, come June 1, data controllers not only have the requirement to register, but should proceed to register under the Act. And so we will be facilitating and going forward with the registration process starting on June 1. Now, again, persons would have more than likely heard the further development in terms of the declaration by the Honorable Minister in the Senate that spoke to a further phased implementation of the Act. It was also mentioned by the Prime Minister when he did his budget presentation. And essentially what that said was, we as an office will be focusing on certain priority sectors or priority groups of controllers in moving forward with registration. And so we have outlined in a recent publication, we published it in yesterday's Observer. It is available and will be available on our website and social media pages. And this will be republished several times, again in the Observer and also in the Gleaner. Now, it is a public notice that speaks to who is required to register. and the categories of persons that should register immediately in terms of persons that we are focusing on. Now, included in those areas, first and foremost, especially for those attorneys that work in the public sector, are all public authorities. And this is public authorities as defined by the legislation. So all public authorities are among the priority areas and are required to commence registration come June 1. And note I say commence. I'll speak to that in a little bit. In addition to the public authorities, we have identified sectors that we know have a high volume of data subjects, as well as a high volume of personal data that they collect, including a large amount of sensitive personal data. And we have said for those reasons, we will be prioritizing controllers in those sectors. So it includes the health sector, the finance sector, the education sector, the ICT industry. All these areas are areas that we're saying these are focus areas from June 1 onwards. Now, let me be clear. Because the requirement for registration is in force, we do not bar anybody from registering. Now, you would note that the legal services sector was not mentioned, but insofar as there's a legal obligation to register, and insofar as persons are ready and able, then by all means, commence your registration process, and we will process those applications for registration. What we're saying is, as at this time, we are focusing on the areas that were mentioned. And because those areas, even though they have been named by sector, may also have some smaller controllers who are not processing as much or who may not be processing with the same level of risk as others, we have further imposed not a limitation, but a qualification to see our focus will be on those controllers who are dealing with 10,000 or more data subjects. So essentially, at this time, we're looking at the bigger controllers, especially in these, what we call high priority sectors that may be more vulnerable, or maybe, when I say vulnerable, I'm talking now in terms of attacks, because we have also seen what has been happening. Now, I mentioned that it is the commencement of registration on June 1. And I say that because we have seen various publications by other persons that refer to June 1 as a deadline. Now, that's a very false narrative, partly because until June 1, you cannot complete the registration process. Up to present, since December 1, what persons have been able to do is to log on to the OIC's website and create their unique data controller account. In order to register as a data controller, you do require a data controller account with the OIC. And so from last year, December 1, persons who are intent on registering or who believe they are ready have been able to go on and create that account. When that account is created, it will provide you with access credentials that will then be used to enter the registration form and input your particulars. Until June 1, the registration form is not and will not be made available to anyone. And so you cannot, as at today, say you are registering or have commenced registering. Come June 1, the form will be made accessible so that persons can proceed with the registration process. Those persons who have already created their data controller account will be notified that they can go ahead and now access the form and enter their particulars. Persons who have not created a data controller account will have to do so in order to enter the registration platform. Now, I also say registration commences because, again, in terms of the process and what it requires to register, it is not a one-off, sit down, enter all the information, and you must be finished and submit your application in one sitting. We have set up the platform in such a way because when you look at what the registration particulars are, as provided by the Act, which was passed from 2020, and the Data Protection Data Controller Registration Regulations, which was issued in April of this year, just 2 months ago. The combination of the factors that are listed is a lot in terms of information, in terms of detail that is required. Now, some persons, because they are not familiar with data protection practices per se, may not necessarily understand all the terminology. They may not necessarily understand all the requirements. They may not have offhand all the information that is required to be entered. And so for that reason, we have specifically set up the registration form to allow individuals time to complete. So similar to a visa application process, you can start your registration, enter the information which you have. If you find that there's information that you do not have, then you have time where you can get that information, come back to the form again, put it in, and move on in the process. At present, it is set to remain open for use for a period of 30 days. So it means once you first log in and start to register, you will have a period of 30 days within which to enter all your information and complete your application. After that 30-day period, however, then the information will be lost. And if you have not completed, you would have to start over. We have heard concerns from some persons as to whether they will be able to complete in 30 days based on what is required. We are exploring with the developer the possibility of extending that time, but because it is set at 30 days for now, what I would say to persons is feel sufficiently comfortable that you can gather your information and complete within 30 days before your first login. If you do log in, then seek to have all the information gathered and available so that you can enter it within the 30-day period. In any event, if you have any challenges with respect to registration, then we ask that you reach out to the office so that we can assist you. Now, in terms of guidance with respect to registration, we must also point out that this will come in 2 forms. We have integrated into the registration form certain basic instructions as to how to complete it. We will also be posting on our website an information note, which will speak specifically to registration. And in that document, what it will do is clarify some of the requirements under the Act and in the regulations, explain some of the terminology and what is required to be provided by the data controller. So if it is that in completing the form, you're not sure what a particular field requires or what something means, then persons can reference that document for an explanation. And that document will be accessible, as I said, on the website and should be accessible even from the form by way of a hyperlink. All right. So that being said, how will the actual process go? The form is set up to be as simple as we could make it. And I say that in that way because it may not be the simplest, easiest form to use, but based on the nature of the information required and how it is to be captured, we have sought to make it as user-friendly as possible. So for the most part, much of the information required can be provided by selecting from options that have been built into the form. Where it is necessary or where multiple options may apply, we have allowed you to select those multiple options. Where you do not find options that are appropriate to you or your practice or your business operations, then there is in some areas provision for free texting. It will be limited, so we do ask that you keep your responses sufficiently short so that you don't end up with the critical information being cut off. But as I said, for the most part, you can select from options, and where necessary, you can input information. I must also add that we are aware that in preparing for compliance, persons have taken various steps. Several controllers have engaged privacy practitioners or consultants to assist them with their readiness. Persons approach that process in different ways. And so there is various reports and information and documentation that controllers may have that will contain the information required for registration. So there are two ways in which this can assist you. Firstly, insofar as it would have already gathered the necessary particulars, then you can look to those documents to pull out the information to enter into the form. The other way in which it can help is that we have allowed to a limited extent for persons to upload information that will verify or validate any of the particulars provided. And so you will have that option. For example, while it is not a requirement for registration, you need not have conducted a DPIA ahead of registering as a controller. If it is that you have done this and there's information relevant to your registration application that you would wish to share, and it is in that report and you wish to provide it, you can go ahead and upload that information. Fair warning, documents can only be uploaded in PDF format. So if you have your reports, your documents, your information in any other format, you will not be able to add those documents. And when those documents come to us as PDF, we'll be able to review them as necessary. It would not be an automatic integration of that information into the registration form. So I just wanted to make that clear. The online registration form is the only method of registering as a data controller. Paper applications will not be accepted. So you cannot print the form, check the boxes, write in anything, and then say, mail it in or deliver it to the OIC. We will not be accepting paper applications. We will not be accepting payments in office. The application process in terms of the entry of registration particulars into the registration form is 100% online and only via the OIC's website using the My OIC portal. So as I stated earlier, the first thing you would need to do is to sign up for your data controller account, and then having created that account, receive the verification email with the access credentials, you use those access credentials, which is the username you provided and a password, to log back in to the portal. Once you log back in using those access credentials, it will automatically give you the option to complete the registration form as long as you're not a registered controller. Once persons are registered, then they would have the option, of course, to update particulars or renew when the time comes. But as this is first time registration, everybody would get the option to proceed with entering their registration particulars into the form. That being said, let me just go quickly through some of the questions that I know persons had. Who is required to register? I said earlier, under the law, all data controllers. As a matter of priority, I indicated what the different sectors are and how we have chosen to classify that. And the public notice is available, as I said, on our website for persons to reference. Can you register yourself, or do you need a privacy specialist to assist you? Controllers can register themselves. As we said, we have sought to make the form as user-friendly as possible. However, the qualifier again is it does require a certain understanding of the requirements of data privacy and the terminology that is used. We have sought to provide clarity in the information note, but it may still assist persons to be guided by a privacy specialist who can, in fuller ways, not just explain the requirements, but also who can look at your particular business and your particular operations and advise as to how this information is relevant to you. Can you register if you require a DPO, but you don't have a DPO? Here's what I will say on that. The law requires certain persons to have a DPO. Not every controller needs to have a DPO, and that is the data protection officer for persons who are not familiar. Now, we are aware again that there is a shortage of DPOs in the country, and so persons have a challenge identifying and engaging someone to act for them. There will come a time, yes, when we will have to look on this provision very strictly and say, well, is the person appointed a full and proper, appropriately qualified DPO or not? We are not there as a country. If we were to be strict on that requirement right now, perhaps very few controllers would be able to register. So what I would say to persons now is, insofar as you are required to appoint a DPO, if you are in a position to engage a DPO, we strongly recommend it. You should do so, and you should enter their DPO's details. In a case where you're required to have a DPO and you may not have yet engaged a DPO, enter your details or enter the details of someone who we can contact in relation to any matter related to data protection for your business. You can edit your particulars, amend your particulars, update your particulars over time. The law does require you to update the Information Commissioner on particulars. So when you're able to engage an appropriately qualified person as your DPO, you can re-log in and you can update that information with the new person's information. But if you are mandated to have a DPO, just know that the form is set to require that that information be entered in order for you to proceed with registration. So you must give contact details for someone as your DPO. Similarly, just to point out to persons, data protection is very personal. Personal data is personal. And so the objective is to ensure that at the end of the day, us as the regulator and the data subject has someone that they can reach out to in the event that there are questions, concerns, complaints, issues related to any processing of personal data. And so you will know when you look at the regulations, because there were additional requirements that were put in the regulations that are not in the Act, and these are reflected in the form. You will know that the aim is to have an individual, a human being that can be contacted in relation to data protection matters. And so again, as you complete the registration, you will find that as it relates to the DPO, as it relates to the data controller representative, where there is one, while it is possible for you to appoint a company, a firm, a partnership as your representative or your DPO, you have to ultimately, if that is the case, name an individual as the direct contact for data protection services. So find someone in the DPO organization, find someone in the data controller organization and say, in the event of a problem, contact John Brown, contact Jane Doe, whoever it is. So that the form will push you to name an actual person. For those practitioners who are sole practitioners operating individually, then you may name yourself as what is referred to in the form as an authorized officer, because the form also introduces that individual, an authorized officer. And that was put there because we recognize that since number one, it is only the overseas data controller who requires a data controller representative. So most local Jamaican controllers will not need one. Not all controllers will need to appoint a DPO. So at the end of the day, if it is that you don't need to appoint a DPO, but you are operating a business, whether as a firm or otherwise, you may need to name somebody who is essentially responsible for handling these matters on your behalf. And so in the regulations, we have included a requirement where there, especially where there is no data controller representative and there is no DPO, for an authorized officer to be named in relation to data protection. Is there a cost to register? I think everyone knows by now from previous sensitization and public awareness sessions and activities that yes, like most regulated entities or activities, there is usually a cost. And so the fees for registration are included in the regulations. These are also posted in the public notice that has been published and are otherwise available and confirmed on our website and social media pages. The maximum fee is for first registration is 25,000, which is for public authorities and for companies. For individuals, it is $7,500. And by individuals here, we're referring to the sole trader, sole proprietor, sole practitioners, whatever you want to call yourself, operating businesses, essentially alone. The Gazette is worded to speak to partnerships as the middle ground, and the fee of 15,000 being applied to those. There, it essentially encapsulates everybody in between. So you're not a public authority or a company, but you're not a sole proprietor or practitioner, then you would pay the partnership fee. So that is something to be noted. Where and how do you pay your registration fee? Come Saturday, June 1, and until further notice, the registration fee will only be payable by way of deposit or transfer of funds into the account of the OIC. And the account details will also be published and will also be included in the instructions that are provided. Eventually, and in very short time, we will be rolling out our electronic payment via the website. We had aimed at having it available for the June 1 date. We do not at this time anticipate that that will be done for June 1, but within a very short time, you will be able to click pay from the registration platform, enter your credit card information and make the payment right there. Until then, payments, as I mentioned, are by way of deposit of funds or transfer of funds into the OIC's account. And in this case, you would require to provide proof of payment as a part of the supporting documents that is uploaded with your registration application. We have gotten queries from some persons as to whether to facilitate payments, the OIC will be providing anything in the form of a quotation, a pro forma, or anything like that. No, that is not something that we are undertaking. It is an obligation that is imposed by statute. And so the statute is there in terms of the justification for payment, and the regulations are there with the confirmation as to what the fees are. So in terms of the requirement to register, that can be proven in terms of the amount required to register. That is also proven by the law on paper as gazetted. We are not in a position to issue performance and quotations and will not be doing so. Because the payments are being done via online electronic methods, as I said, deposit or transfers, then receipts would be issued by the financial institutions via those platforms. Do you require any special software or program to register? You don't require it, but these things can be useful to persons in terms of preparing to register. They will not register you. As we mentioned before, registration is only possible by entering the particulars into the form on the OIC's website. But in terms of doing your data inventory and your data mapping, identifying what processes use what personal information and for what purposes, there are various tools and options out there that can assist persons in that preparatory process. I've discussed for the most part how do you register already. Can you come to the OIC to register or get help in registering? You can send your queries, questions, any issues that you have to the OIC using our usual contact information. General queries do go to info@oic.gov.jm. If the query is specific to any challenge that you may have with the registration process or the form, then you can send those queries to helpdesk@oic.gov.jm, which will allow IT to identify the issue and assist you. And of course, if it's an issue of understanding the requirements in terms of compliance or specific to registration, then you can send an email as well to compliance@oic.gov.jm. And all this information will be available, as I said, on our website and our platforms. We have already published one notice. We are constantly uploading information. Before Saturday, there will be a list of frequently asked questions and answers that will help to shed more light on the registration process for persons. And as I mentioned, the information note, which is specific to registration, will also be uploaded. How long does the application process take? Well, that really depends on your readiness, how much information you have on hand and available to enter. If you have a fairly, let's say, not the most complex practice or business, a fairly simple operation, and if you know your operations and your data processing activities and have the information on hand, then to be honest, you can sit down and complete the form in one sitting in relatively short time. I mean, I have tested it myself and I've been able to complete an application in under an hour. But as we mentioned, due to the nature of the information required and whether or not it's available, it may take you longer than that. Once you have submitted the application, then it would come to us for a review and a verification. Of course, this is a new system. It is a first-time process. And so it would be difficult for us to estimate at this time to say, all right, you will get a confirmation within X time or Y time. We really are waiting to see the volume of applications that come in and make a determination in terms of how quickly the turnaround can be for persons to be notified that they have in fact been registered. With respect to that notification, just to point out, the system will confirm that you have submitted your application, so you will have that. When your application is approved, the registration particulars as required by the law will be publicly available and accessible in the register of data controllers. Do you have to be fully compliant in order to register? No. As I said at the outset, compliance is not a destination. It is a process, a moving target, a goal that you constantly strive towards. And so even if you do not believe that you have met every single compliance requirement, you are meeting all the standards or, you know, any of the other things, you can still come forward and you are encouraged to come forward and register with the OIC because registration is one of the requirements for compliance. What period does registration cover is an important question because of the gap between the December 1 period and the June 1 start date. Just to confirm, registration under the Data Protection Act is for a period of a year. The requirement for registration came into effect December 1, 2023. And so we are currently in the first registration year, which is from December 1, 2023 to November 30, 2024. Now, your registration and your registration fee applies to that 1 year period, regardless of when you register. So whether you registered on December 1, 2023, were it allowed, or if you delay and you wait until November 28 or 29, 2024, it is still registration for the 23-24 year, those 365 days. The fee still covers that period, and it means come December 1, 2024, when the next registration year starts, your obligation to renew your registration under the law also kicks in. And so you will have to update your registration particulars in order for them to remain in the register, because if not renewed, you will no longer be a registered data controller. Your information will be removed from the register. And so you will be required to renew the particulars and pay the fee for that year. The renewal fees are a lot less than the first registration fee. In most cases, it's about half or less than half. So the $25,000 for public authorities and companies moves to 15,000, and the other fees are also adjusted downwards in similar manner. Now, where can you get more information? I've said repeatedly through this discussion that we have posted on our website not just instructions, but further clarification regarding the registration process and other compliance requirements. And there you can also find various means of contacting the OIC, not just by email, but also by telephone. Ahead of the commencement of registration, we have acquired 4 additional phone lines, and that information is also available on the website in terms of those numbers. You may also utilize the contact us option and function on the website in order to reach out to us. And we do respond as soon as it's reasonable, but we do ask persons to be mindful of the fact that we are only one controller. We have multiple data controllers. And of course, given the need for information and everything, you have to be mindful that we do get a very high volume of requests. And so our turnaround times in terms of responses have gotten a little more lengthy. What we have tried to do is to pull from the requests received some of the more common questions or concerns, and we'll be trying to address those in terms of our various posts on our different online platforms. And we do have, in addition to the website, a LinkedIn account, Facebook account, Instagram, Twitter. So that I think is a summary of registration and what you can expect. I am told that there are a couple of questions, so I'm going to try to address as many of those as quickly as I can, recognizing that based on the time, I will have to jump off very shortly for my other engagement, which I'm now a little bit late for. All right, for sole practitioners, what is our priority date range for registration? As I said, there is a deadline for registration. All controllers have a legal obligation to register, and so you can register immediately. We are not discouraging anybody from registering. We have not barred anyone, and we cannot reject any registration. So by all means, seek to meet your legal obligation as soon as possible. If you can register on Saturday, log on, register on Saturday. As at right now, if as a sole practitioner, you are not processing personal data for over 10,000 data subjects, and I assume by sole practitioner here, based on the audience, that you're referring to an attorney, then insofar as the legal services sector has not been specifically named, if you are not yet ready, then you have some time. I am not going to and cannot tell you right now that, okay, I will call in the attorneys in a month or in 2 months or in 3 months. It is a new process based on the definition of data controller, which is very wide. It is difficult to estimate the total number of persons that will be controllers. And so we can't really say, okay, we're gonna do 5,000 per week or per day or per whatever. We have to also watch and monitor in terms of the volume that we get in and our own turnaround, hence why we focus on the larger and more vulnerable persons now. At a later date, we will, with due and reasonable notice, announce other priority groups that we encourage to come forward and join. Am I correct that doctors with less than 10,000 clients are required to register? However, they will not be targeted. The factors in terms of the sectors, because doctor is in the health sector and the health sector is a priority sector, but the factors, as you will read in the notice, have been combined. It is in this sector and processing 10,000 or more. Why should we have to pay for something we're not volunteering for? I think that's a rhetorical question and I'll skip it. Do notary publics need to be registered? We are required to keep records of identification. Strictly speaking, the answer to that then would be yes, but to be honest, I cannot tell you I have specifically considered notary publics as a category, but on a strict definition of processing and personal data and data controllers, then yes, it could apply to them. Anonymous attendee, what should you do if the account was created on the portal, but you have not received a verification email? You can send an email to help desk, indicate the email address used to create the account. We will look at it and either have the verification email issued, or we will see if there is any system error that is affecting it and contact you accordingly when it's resolved or with an update. How do you know whether you're required to have a DPO? The Act speaks to the categories of persons for whom DPOs are required. Public authorities, persons processing sensitive personal data, criminal records, and large-scale controllers, and any other category as may be prescribed. There have not yet been any prescriptions under this Act for that or any other section. We do not pay for anti-money laundering, not something that requires a response. I'm trying to register for my company using the MyUIC portal, and it is saying access denied. For security reasons, there are certain conditions regarding the information entered to create an account. It could be that you have an email extension, for example, that is either not so common or that might be red flagged, and so it is not immediately accepted. Again, send an email to helpdesk@oic.gov.jm, just indicate the email address that you are using so that we can query what is happening in the background and reach out to you and ensure that your account can be created. How are attorneys employed by a sole practitioner to be treated? As Cameron is typing an answer to that one. I think that is going to tie into the nature of the relationship and who is acting for who and the extent to which there is any separate legal identity and obligation. How detailed do we need to be in documenting to whom data will be transferred? Do we have to name entities or departments? There is a requirement to name joint controllers, which are persons who, together with the data controller, applying, assist in determining what is processed and how. And for that, you are asked to name the individuals. We recognize that there may be multiple joint controllers. And so what we have done in the instructions is to advise that you limit it to, for example, the primary two to which most transfers are done. As it relates to the other persons, for example, your data processors, the form does not require you to specifically indicate and name those persons. We have tried to avoid getting too granular with the detail that is required. And certainly outside of, for example, naming the data controller, the DPO, the representative authorized officer, these persons, the form does not require you to really give out any data subjects or other persons' personal information. Is it possible to get the recording of this meeting? I logged on late. The GLC is recording it. This decision to share would be theirs. Let me just state, the OIC would also appreciate a copy of this recording for our own purposes. Can you share data regarding your data subjects with the courts tribunals without their consent? Consent is, sorry, not the GLC, Jambar, my apologies. Not a mistake to make at all. Sorry about that. So the Act does provide for various exceptions or provisions as it relates to when and how information can be shared. That is a more extensive compliance discussion and more suited to another forum, or since he has a bit more time, perhaps Chuck can address that one. I'm trying to answer as much as I can before I jump off. Will we be able to access a complete copy of the application form in order to prepare the information required when uploading? Stick up in, let me just double check. Did we enable to download the form, like as a PDF and print? Not at this time. However, what I can say is that the form is essentially developed along the lines of the Act 16.2, the registration particulars, and the data controller registration regulations. So in both of those documents, it literally sets out A, B, C, D, E, what is required. And that is what we have built out in the form, A, B, C, D, E. We follow almost strictly to the requirements that are in the law, with very little in terms of addition or variation. So you can be guided by those provisions to know what to expect in the form. For churches that fall in a particular denomination, for example, can the union register? Again, the obligation in terms of registration is on each separate legal person. And so that is how it is to be treated. Have you considered justices of the peace? Same category as notary public, similar function. Persons are asking about less than 10,000 clients. Is it the persons falling below that threshold do not need to register? I did say everyone needs to register because everyone has a legal obligation to register. It is a matter of whether or not persons are being focused on as a priority at this time. Do realtors fall within the priority category? And the answer to that is they have not been listed at this time, but again, should register as soon as possible. Unfortunately, I am well beyond the time that was contemplated and must jump off in order to attend to another similar engagement. And so forgive me, but I have done my best. Persons who have further queries can reach out to us using the contact information on our website.